everybody, if you please give a round of applause. So Mr. Leggett, we thank you for coming in. But instead of hearing from me, I'd like you to hear from the students right off the bat. Sure. So Ben.
Sir, on behalf of this entire class, I would like to thank you for coming in. I would also like to thank you for not only reading our letters, but responding to our letters. And we had worked extremely hard on them, and we really appreciate that you took your time to read them, respond to them, and go through your entire schedule to meet us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Let me, first of all, thank you and thank your teachers, the principal, everyone for inviting me here today. One of the reasons why I responded was because far too often young people are not actively engaged in important issues that really impact their lives. And when I see that, it is encouraging for me, and so I wanted to come out, first of all, to thank you for writing, secondly, for being so engaged and finding that this is an issue that you wanted to be a part of. Now, when I say that, I want to just talk about a couple of other things before I get to the main topic today about curfew. Because when I look at students today, I'm reminded of my time that I was in high school. And it was a difficult time in a different era. But one of the things that I learned early on was that I was much smarter than I realized, but I never really applied it at the time that I thought was appropriate. And so as a young person, I went through all the difficult challenges of growing up in the rural South in Louisiana, one of 13 kids, 13. And we had a 3-room house. And that 3-room house was about just the size of this entire room. I want to repeat that now. Not 3 bedrooms, not 3 bathrooms, 3 rooms, about the size of this room. And I was very much interested in sports. And unfortunately, at that point in time, I did not apply myself academically the way that I should have. But I had a transformation because when I came out of high school, I realized that my options were somewhat limited. I thought of joining the military, and to be a part of the military was something at that point in time that was quite important. But my high school football coach and my mother said, you know, you're a smart kid, you should go to college. You should try to strive to go to college. It's something that is worthwhile. And I thought about that, and I said, oh, no, I'm not college material. I want to go to join the military. I want to do some other things. But they encouraged me to do so. The challenge was I was not such an athlete that I had scholarship offered to me to go to college. My parents were very poor, and so the options to go into college was very difficult. And so my high school coach said to me, there's a program at Southern University that you should attend. And it was a work-study program whereby you attend during the summer prior to your first year of college. That will allow you to live on the campus, allow you to work, and in exchange, you would get an opportunity to enter school that fall, assuming your grades and everything else were appropriate to do so. So I got on a bus in Alexandria, Louisiana, and traveled down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, walked up to the business office and said to the business manager, I'm here to participate in this program. And the first thing they said to me, well, where's your letter of authorization? I didn't have anything, so they sent me away. I came back an hour later. I said, where's your transcript? They sent me away. I didn't have anything. I came back again after lunch. They sent me away. I came back again about 4:30 in the afternoon, and finally, you know, a lady said to me, I'm sick and tired of seeing your ugly face come back and forth to this window. You simply won't go away. We have nothing to offer you. You can't get in the program. So I started to walk away again, and finally she called me back and she said, come back a second. She said, listen, there's an opportunity if you're willing to take it, that if you're willing to work with our outside maintenance crew, we'll allow you to stay in the dormitory, we'll give you the stipend, and we'll process your entry into school this fall if you're willing to do that. So I thought about it for a second. I said, fine. Now what that meant, outside maintenance crew, literally meant cutting the grass and picking up trash around the university campus all summer. That's what I did. And so I decided to do it. Now, in doing that, something happened to me during that summer. I said to myself, you know, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. I'm not going to cut grass. I'm not going to pick up trash. I said the only grass that I would cut the rest of my life would be grass on property that I own. It just came to me, just like that. So I decided to take all of that energy and all those efforts, all those things that I was doing wrong in the past, dedicate it academically toward my studies. So to make a long story short, by the time I left the school, I was an honor student. I was president of the student body of about 10,000 students. I was the brigade commander and deputy brigade commander of the ROTC brigade. I left the college with a regular Army commission, one of the tops in the entire country. I ended up serving in the military, went all the way up to the rank of captain, served in Vietnam, received honors and awards from Vietnam. I came out of the military, decided to go to graduate school. I got a graduate degree at Howard University, a law degree at Howard University where I finished first in my law school class with the third highest academic average in the history of the law school. Advanced a degree in law from George Washington University. I was the assistant and associate dean of the law school, professor of law at Howard University Law School, a White House fellow, a council member, chairman of the Democratic Party, and now county executive, Montgomery County, Maryland. Now I say all of that because I just propose looking at you today to say that many of you or some of you could be in that very same situation. And so that transformation is something that is real. But you have an opportunity earlier than I did because my transformation didn't start until I was actually in college. You have an opportunity to do so sooner. And so when you do things such as writing a letter, engage in the county executive, thinking about things within your community, it shows me the potential for you to achieve much earlier and to be more successful. And you have to do that earlier in your life because one of the things that is clear to me that as I've traveled literally all around the world, and I see students from China, India, Brazil, Israel, that your competition and your world will be far different than mine because those students are prepared, they're engaged, they're academically inclined, and they are out to transform the world. Our future and our hope and expectation rest on you. And so when you engage through your teachers, through your network here at school on important local issues, it suggests to me that you are the type of student that will help us transform the world. And that's what I want to see in you. And that's why I'm here today, to talk narrowly about a small subject that we're going to discuss and anything else you may want to discuss as we take this time to do so. Now, the issue before us today that you engaged me on was one about curfew. Now, if I was in your position and thinking about it, I'd probably be opposed to a curfew myself. There's no way, shape, or form at 14, 15, 16, 17, when I was in high school, that if someone had said to me, there is a curfew, that I would have willingly said, boy, that's a great idea. Who thought of such a wonderful idea? No. But what you have to do, though, is change positions. The position that you sit in versus the position of the person who are your adults, the responsible leaders, the political leaders, and others. So if you look at it from your perspective, it is easier to see and accept the idea that a curfew is restrictive. It shows a lack of trust. It shows that the parents have some misgivings potentially about us. It shows all of those things from a student perspective. So I could very well understand you're not wanting to do that, not wanting to accept that. Very few students anywhere who want to say that there is a curfew. But here's why I decided to do it. First of all, a curfew is not something that is so unique and so exceptional. There are literally hundreds of curfews all over the United States. Most major urban areas today have curfews, believe it or not. In our surrounding communities, there is a curfew in the District of Columbia. There's one in Prince George's County. Why? Because they want to, quote, protect young people. The underlying assumption here is protect. Protect. To assure and to make certain that reduce the number of options that you have to make major mistakes. To protect. Because we found that students are engaged in activities sometimes after hours, that they are influenced by other people after hours, they have less supervision after hours, and that the young people from the District of Columbia and Prince George's County where they do have a curfew, you know where they go? Montgomery County, where we do not have a curfew. That's why we see many of them here, where we do not have a curfew. And so we've seen by conduct, by behavior, that people have come here, influencing our young people, engage in, quote, antisocial behavior, and as a result of that, creating challenges for us here in Montgomery County. Now, when you start with the assumption to say, well, okay, we could accept the curfew, but there are differences. It may, quote, label all students as students who are engaged in antisocial behavior, and that's unfair to some people. It may suggest, again, that you don't trust them. And there are some legitimate reasons as to why young people will be out after certain hours. I know all of that. We try to provide a number of exceptions to, in effect, take that consideration into fact. If you're working, if you're in school behavior programs and services, we provide a number of exceptions, probably 10 to 12 exceptions that would allow for those kinds of things to happen. But here's the thing that really hits me in a number of ways. There are a number of people who've said, by having this curfew, it will provide a sort of stereotypical atmosphere to be created in the county, racial profiling to occur in the county, and as a result of that, we will probably place more students in, quote, in harm's way than otherwise intended. Now, in order to make that assumption that there is or will be racial profiling, you have to make the following assumption, that the police will racially profile. I don't necessarily make that assumption. We have police that are well trained. We have police that understand their roles and responsibilities. And on occasion, you may have a police that will do something wrong. But you have to also understand that if a police is not properly trained and one who wants to engage in racial profiling, they don't need this law. You don't need this law to racially profile, because racially profile is something that a police acts upon somewhat subjectively. And you can never totally train that subjective mind not to do that. For example, if a police observes your car driving 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles over the speed limit, that police has an option to do what? To stop you. Oftentimes, the police decide, well, I'm not going to stop you. So if they're going to do that for racial profiling, they've got a number of things that they can do already that will do that. Whether or not it's from vehicles, whether or not it's from conduct, the way you speak, the way you act. If a police was of that mindset, they don't need this law to racially profile. If you're prone to do wrong and racially profile, there are so many activities for which a police subjective judgment is made that they could do that already. So that goes beyond the point. So the reason why I wanted to do it was to protect young people, to ensure that we responded to some of the, quote, urban issues that are affected from other communities, and to hopefully place a barrier between the major serious adult crime-like activities between that and our young people. Now, go back to what I said to you earlier about my life. One of the things that I can look back on in life is that I never made, quote, the major mistakes growing up as a child. The major mistakes. The major mistakes that will get you in jail for a long period of time. Major mistakes that would get you in such a criminal activity, drug use, those kinds of things. The major mistakes that would cause you serious harm. We have an awful lot of things in our society that are designed today to help you. This school, all the counseling, all the mentoring programs that occur in school, they're designed to help you. My belief is that if you stay in school, you take advantage of all those things both in and out of school that are designed to help you, ultimately you will be successful. Assuming you don't make that major mistake. That major mistake that could get you stabbed, shot, the major mistake that would send you to jail, the major mistakes such as drug use and all those kinds of things. Once those kinds of decisions are made, it is more difficult to, in fact, ensure that you have this proper transformation. So one of the things that the curfew is designed to do is to reduce the chances that you make those major mistakes at a time when there's less supervision. You know, we've had these sort of packed robberies, these mob-like robberies where young people all decide they're going to descend on the 7-Eleven, 30 or 40 young people at a time. Just think of that, 30 or 40 at a time. They all thought that this was, quote, playful. And they were not going to steal anything great. They were going to grab soda pops, chips, those kinds of things. They're going to do all of those things. Now, just think of what possibly could have happened. Let's assume that 30 or 40 people in the same incident, which is a live one that actually occurred, rushed into the 7-Eleven. And the clerk in the 7-Eleven panicked, literally panicked. They're not knowing whether or not this is a bunch of young people on drugs, doesn't know whether or not he or she will be hurt. And so the clerk panics. And the clerk grabs something to defend him or herself in that situation because they panic, not knowing that the students have a playful attitude in mind. And in response to the clerk, one of the students grabs something that is sharp or has something that is on him or her and stabs the clerk. Now, is that far-fetched? Is that far-fetched that was something that could have happened? 30, 40 people rush in. The clerk becomes what? Paralyzed, fearful of what may happen. The clerk grabs something in order to, quote, defend him or herself. The student, one of them happened to have a pocket knife or grabs something and responds, stabs the clerk. Now, this is not just one stabbing involving one student. You have 30 or 40 people all engaged in a robbery. And a death potentially happens as a result of a robbery. The lives at that point in time of 30 or 40 students, major incident now is impacted. That's why I'm looking at a curfew. Now, unfortunately, we got in such a big debate here in the county council that we never actually voted on it. And so the measure was essentially tabled. But I wanted you to know the rationale. I understand why you would not want it. I appreciate that. And as I said before, to be honest, if I was sitting in your shoes, I probably would not as well. But I wanted you to understand the motivation and why, from an adult perspective, from a teacher, from a principal, for people who are in a different position, they may or may not have a different perspective about how you see that. My responsibility now are not those of a student. A chance when I was looking at that from a different perspective. But as county executive, trying to protect and ensure that our county is well protected and looking out for your interests and your welfare.
So I think you touched on a lot of specifics to the questions that we had. So we'll give the questions, and maybe if you just want to go a little bit more in depth with some of the specific aspects of the curriculum. Okay. So Jack, go ahead.
What is your current position on the curfew? What is the reason for your position? What goals do you hope to achieve with the curfew?
Well, the main goal would be protection of young people and to reduce the potential for them to be engaged in serious conduct, antisocial behavior, criminal activity when there's lack of supervision. And clearly, when you're talking about hours after 11 during the weekday, 12 during the weekend, we do not have the kind of supervision that I think young people will have. So my position remains the same. Unfortunately, as I said before, the legislation now is in somewhat of a pause because we have not been able to go forward with it. So that remains the objective. The objective is to protect young people, to ensure that we reduce the chances for criminal activity at a time when we have lack of supervision. So that's the objective. I would hope that we can achieve that, and the ultimate objective would be A, potentially reduce crime, reduce the number of chances that young people are injured or hurt as a result of that, because 4 or 5% of all the criminal activity that occurs during that period of time and injuries involve young people. And again, as I indicated before, reduce the chance for those major mistakes and things that may impact young people. Right? Well, let me repeat the question. Since crime rate goes up at night, right? Why not make, the reason I'm repeating this, I want to sure we get it on camera, why not make a curfew for everyone? Well, thank you for your question. The challenge for that is that it is a difficult task to enforce. It'll be riddled with so many exceptions that will be hard to do that because just think of it. Adults at night clearly have the wherewithal to do a lot of things that fall within the exception rule. And I just think it'll be a logistical and nightmare to include that. We try to make a distinction, and whether or not it should be 18, 17, or whatever, between what we consider adult-like activities versus those things which we think of as juvenile or children. So to include that, I think would be onerous, it would be too difficult to enforce, and I'm not sure that it would produce the kinds of results that we want. My hope and expectation is that as people age or they get older, they will conform their activities in such a way that you can avoid that. You're not likely to see 30 adults all on a flash mob descending on the Safeway. That's not going to happen. I don't think that I've ever heard of a case like that, a flash mob to do that. Young people do that because they are not as mature. They're more likely to be influenced by their peers, and they are influenced by other aspects of it. All of those young people who went in there were not bad young people. There were only 2 or 3 of them that had very strong juvenile records. But 3 or 4 of them could influence a whole group of people. You're not likely to have that with an adult. And the reason why that is so important, if you go back and you've ever seen that film of what happened in Germantown with that flash mob, students rushed in, grabbing things all over the place and rushing out. I looked at the film and I saw a couple of things that sort of struck me. One of the young ladies, at least 2 of them, as they were rushing down the halls, the aisleways of the 7-Eleven, knocked down a bag of chips on both sides of them. You know what they did? They stopped and picked the chips up and put them back on the stall. Now, why did I notice that and why was that so important? It said to me that these were basically good kids. That if you're involved in a flash robbery and you knock down chips in the 7-Eleven and you're going to stop to pick the chips back up off the ground and replace them back onto the stand, to me that's a kid that is relatively good. And they're doing something just for the fun. But yet and still, as you take that extra step that I've just described before, someone stabbing the clerk, that young person now, life could be ruined. Where they were basically a good person. They're going to knock the chips down. You don't do that in a flash robbery. You're going to pick the chips back up and put them back on the stand. Who cares? They cared because they were trained to do something better. And you won't see that kind of flash stuff with an adult. And that's the kind of activity we're trying to get to. Thank you for your question.
Amber.
What is your backup or next step if the curfew fails?
Well, right now, it has failed because legislatively you can't go forward. Until and unless the council, at least one more person on the council decides to change his or her mind, then we can't go forward. But there are other things that we are doing. For example, I instituted what is called a Positive Youth Initiative. And the Positive Youth Initiative is designed to provide a positive environment for young people to do a number of things. For example, we have after-school programs. We have sports academies. We have programs designed to help young people with homework, mentoring programs, those kinds of things to help young people. We've also increased the size of our police force so that we could have a presence that's out there. People will see more police, especially in areas where we have large numbers of young people gathering, and they could see that presence, and maybe that may be a deterrent to them. So we're trying to do it from providing wholesome things for them to do, job training, mentoring programs, internships, after-school programs, athletic programs, all of those things we're funding, I think, right now the tune of about $8 million of things that we are doing under what I call the Positive Youth Initiative. But at the same time, we also have to provide the other side of that, i.e. a stronger presence of law enforcement in the community as well. So on one hand, we're providing the Positive Youth Initiative development. On the other side, we're responding with police presence and programs such as the curfew. Thank you.
How are you going to enforce the curfew will prevent racial discrimination or profiling?
I think I touched on it a little bit. I don't assume racial profiling and discrimination. I believe that we have well-trained police officers, men and women, who are not likely to do so. And the question assumed that they will do that. You don't need to have the curfew if your mind is to do this. You don't need this. You don't need to do this if your mind is that in your mind and in your heart you are, quote, a racist. This is what that would assume, and that you would profile. You don't need the curfew to do that. There's so much subjective judgment on the part of the police that they could do that in a variety of ways. So they don't need another tool to do it. Again, the police could give you a ticket, they could give you a warning, and they could just simply let you go by if they see you going just a little bit above the speed limit. You follow me? So if you are a racist, which this question assumes, and you see a person of color doing those things, then you'll do that right now. And so you could take any number of activities and subjectively look at those activities, and if you're a person of a racist mind, then you don't need this law to do so.
My name's Colin, and so pretty much if the person is a racist, there is no way to prevent discrimination.
Dr. King once said something that was the following. He said that many laws and many things that we can do, that we can, in fact, provide an opportunity to deal with some people who are heartless, but we can't regulate the heart. You can't do it. You may suppress it, and they may be a little bit more clever in how they do it. But if you are racist, and if that's in your heart, and you have not learned to evolve from that, then there are so many ways that you will discriminate, you will stereotype. It's just a part of you. Now, the most obvious thing, clearly, you could get at. When I was a student and we were looking at things like public accommodation, and I was being arrested for sitting in at lunch counters and so forth, that's an obvious kind of thing that happened. But the person who operated the restaurant, their heart probably didn't change. You can affect that outward emotion, but the heart didn't change, possibly. Not simply because you passed a law. So whether you had a curfew or not, and if a person was of the mind to discriminate, as a police officer, given the enormous amount of authority that they have, if that person was of that mind, they would do so anyway. So I don't see that. A, I don't see that they are that way. But B, even if they were that way, the curfew would not add substantially to their authority to do what they can otherwise do now.
My name's Jacob, and what parts of the county did you put most police officers in? Like the part where the most urban areas where the most kids live, or the parts where the kids gather the most?
Well, basically, some of them overlap. For example, in portions of East Silver Spring are areas where we had large numbers of people, young people out, and there's also areas where we have high numbers of crime. But if you look at the county, let me give you a number of places. The Gaithersburg Lake Forest area, the Germantown Town Center area, portions of Silver Spring, Aspen Hill, Wheaton, between Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Silver Spring area, the East County area. And so those are areas where you have high numbers of youth that are out, and one or two of them, especially the East County area, Lake Forest area, where you have high incidence of crime as well. And so what we try to do is to have a higher police presence in those areas. And one of the things that we are doing now, I am in the process of significantly increasing our police force by approximately 140 additional officers. We increased it last year by 40, and we will then have another increase this year to bring it up to that number.
My name is Andrew, and my question was, if the team is already setting out to do like a crime at night past the curfew, why would a curfew law that doesn't have like the consequences aren't as bad as like what they're going to have to do? Why would that stop?
Well, it is not going to stop a hardened criminal. The young person who is clever enough, who has the criminal intent to do something. They will find a way around the curfew. But what it may stop is that as that young person or person who is of that mind decides to go and say to someone else, why don't you join me? Why don't you get a couple of your friends to join me? And we're going to together go out and do X, Y, and Z. It may mean that if he asks 3 or 4 people to join him, and that person has happened to be after 11 o'clock at night, then 1 or 2 of those people may say, well, no, I'm not sure that I'm going to do that because I know that there is a curfew out there. And I don't want anything to adversely affect my record because I'm interested in going to college or the military or whatever. So I'm not going to do that. And so for every young person that says that, we are helped. So it's not going to stop that hardened youth. In that situation I talked about in Germantown, there were 3 or 4 kids that had criminal records. But the rest of them, probably 20 or so of them, had none. Now, had you had a curfew, some of them may have said, boy, we're talking about something that's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not going to be out 2 o'clock in the morning because my parents will know about it, I may get picked up or stopped or get a ticket for curfew violation. And let's say rather than 35 or 40 young people going out, there were only 10 because the others decided they're not going to violate the curfew. That helps. That's why the curfew will be helpful. That some of those kids may say, I'm not going to do that. So we have now reduced the chance that you had that stabbing that now affects 30 kids to maybe half that or less.
How will other people look at this county as there's a curfew going on? Like, won't it ruin a county's reputations? Because, like, if there's a curfew, they might think there will be, like, there was more violence and gang going on.
Well, the question is, does the curfew, in essence, provide a negative image about the county? Well, number one, keep in mind what I said earlier. There are curfews all over the place. There are probably 500 major areas where there are curfews, so everybody would be run to start with. Secondly, you got a choice here. The choice would be by having a curfew in name and principle that is executed that helps potentially save and reduces crime versus having that on the book as a negative indication will be somewhat of a political and public relations problem. If, on the other hand, we got more negative reaction on those flash mobs in Germantown and in Silver Spring and the problems we got more negative publicity about that than we ever had about curfew. All you need is one flash mob, one crime that goes awry, and that image is posted all over the place. And that's, so if I had to err, I would err by having the protections in place, err by having the curfew there, versus reducing the chances that we had those kinds of flash mobs.
And the last question we had, and maybe just a way to wrap it up, is I don't know if you have any just general advice, anything that you haven't mentioned, as they go through high school and then go beyond to move on to college and careers. Any advice as they're starting that process?
Right. Remember I said to you earlier that I did so well in college and post-college, and I didn't do well in high school. I said to myself, what if I started a little bit earlier? What if I demonstrated that I was sincere about my academic performance and doing well earlier? And what a difference that would make. That's the message and opportunity that you have, that you can start now, reduce those chances for mistake, and start performing earlier. And recognize also the challenges that you face, not only here, but internationally. Also, one of the things that people have said to me is that you really did well by the time that it really mattered. The time you took the test, the time you had to perform. But I didn't do as well when I was preparing for it. The number of times that I asked a question and I was wrong about that, too many to recognize. I was teaching law school, I said to students, don't be fearful of asking a question and being wrong. That's the preparation phase of it. Don't be fearful about talking out. And so sometimes we are intimidated and say, oh boy, I may ask a question that sounds, quote, stupid. Or I may get the answer that the teacher is asking me wrong. By not engaging, by not studying, by not preparing yourself, and then having this fear of being wrong or being embarrassed, that's a mistake. I can't tell you the number of times that I was probably wrong about an answer in class and asked a question that may have seemed stupid to some, but I did it. That's why we're engaged in this learning process. That's why you have a teacher who would help guide you through the right answer. He'll much prefer you asking the question, responding, trying to make that effort, and then correcting that and learning together as opposed to sitting there too timid, not prepared, and not engaging yourself. If you do that, I'm certain that you're going to be successful. If you take advantage of the resources that you have now in this school and not wait as I did, that we all would benefit from this in the long term. That would be the message that I would give you. Thank you. Thank you.
And again, everybody here is a huge thank you to you.
Thank you.
And personally, as a teacher, just the fact that you responded to their letter and you came in and answered their questions, and we've discussed this as a class, the fact now that there's a physical thing to remind them that, yes, they can make a difference in talking to authority figures and talking to politicians. I think this is going a huge way for them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you.